Guy passed by here in person and added on those 2 zeros. He was spitting mad when he saw what they was offering. He wasn't flattered. He said, a measly $1,000 for me is much too little. I'm worth a lot more than that. That's right, he said that. And then he added the zeros on the 1,000. There isn't anyone got the guts to face that killer, eh? At least, it's been that way till now.
Do you expect me to talk?
Hello and welcome to episode 230 of Do You Expect Us to Talk? I'm Becca and as always joined by my fellow co-hosts Chris and Dave, and also for this series we are joined by our extra special film music expert host Charlie Brigden. How are you all doing?
Good evening, folks.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for waiting, everybody. Sorry we've not recorded since July.
Yeah, it's our regular pattern of doing one every 4 months.
And every 6 months.
Well, no, it's not even that, is it? We take like 3 or 4 months where must look to people like we've given up, and then we'll just be super regular for about 4 months, and then it'll happen again.
It'll happen again. No, life just got in the
Chris's
way,
fault.
like various things of having Chris.
What basically happened is Chris saw a naked woman earlier this year, and we're all still paying the price.
Yeah, pretty much.
I went on holiday. We've had a good time. It's been alright.
Yeah. No, but basically, like, who'd have thought having a newborn baby in the house would take up your time? That's pretty much.
It's funny how that happens, really.
Yeah, you know, when you got balanced out and a full-time job on top of that, you know, it gets a bit like, I don't know, you don't really like. What takes you by surprise is like you think, yeah, it's fine, you know, it can't be, you know, you can take 2 hours of your week.
And all of a sudden you're quite busy.
Surely you can watch movie. You
change jobs as well.
You can watch movie while, you know, like handling a baby. It's fine. It's like, you know you'd be surprised how much time it takes up. I mean, and I'm sure Charlie will be testament to that, but it's not just that. It's like the sleep. You know, it's getting up, doing feeds. You know, like especially in the beginning. Especially, it's not so bad now because just a bit more settled.
A bit more of a pattern.
Yes.
A bit more routine.
Yeah, once you sort of get that down and you get used to it, then it's like, right, okay. But, yeah.
Well, it could be worse because a lot of new parents are like baby obsessed. You could have demanded we did 3 Men and a Baby or something as the next show, and then like that fucking film with Dr. Keaton and a baby and so on.
I've just realised I've not even shown you guys any new pictures. So like, you know, I'm not one of these. So obviously I've not been one of those dads who goes like,
"No, you
hey, have you seen my baby? Have you seen my baby?" Like.
No, and consciously, actually, to be fair, in the nicest possible way, because we all still talk to each other, but we've more or less left Chris alone because we didn't really want to start. The trouble is, even if you just say hi, he might think, are they just trying to like get me to record something? And it's like, leave him alone for a couple of months.
Yeah, so, we're trying to get onto it. I think obviously just checking over there and making sure you're okay. Obviously, because of being premature, one thing or another. But yeah, we didn't want to kind of needlessly harass you, definitely. So.
Yeah. So Chris was premature, but she still got pregnant anyway. Oh, sorry, the baby was
premature. Sorry, you know what I mean. I don't know. Chris might be premature. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, I was late apparently when I.
Oh. He's too busy to come out. He was like, no, I'm just going to hang in here a bit longer.
Chris missed the joke there. he thought he meant his own.
Oh right, yeah.
But
well, obviously not.
Quite clearly not. No. He's back on time.
So, for those who have forgotten or listened to it a very long time ago, we're continuing with our quest to do all the westerns on the basis that only about half a dozen were ever made. So, what are we covering tonight, Becca?
Tonight, yes, we are getting back in the saddle for our Dollars trilogy, be it called the Blood Money trilogy, the Man with No Name trilogy. So previously, many moons ago, we reviewed Fistful of Dollars. Tonight, we finally get onto the middle of this section for a few dollars more, starring. This is going to be a long list. Just go on IMDb and check it out yourself. Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef, Klaus Kinski, Jan Maria Valenti, and other names that I have to mangle. This amazing score by Ennio Morricone, script by Sergio Leone, Fulvio Marcella, Luciano Vincentoni, and many more. Directed by Sergio Leone. Released in 1965. Apologies for mangling all the names. I can only apologise.
I just appreciate you did an Italian accent for one of them.
Yeah, you did go a bit zigzag with one of the names. But the one thing we mentioned in without wanting to step all over the facts, just the one thing I'll bring up at the start is we mentioned last time. I think I asked Charlie, and Charlie was a bit non-committal on it because I think it's debatable whether Clint Eastwood is playing the same character in all three films. And actually, there's a definitive answer that isn't definitive. And the reason I say that is there was a lawsuit because for whatever reason, Charlie may know this better than me, but Leone fell out with the previous producers, produced with a different team this time, Alberto Grimaldi, and was sued for ownership of the character. And he argued, it was a different character, and the judgment more or less said that the idea of a sort of stranger coming into town, a man with no name, if you will, is kind of a trope character. So no, it's not really owned as such. But then you'll read synopses of the film that will say things like 18 months after the events of A Fistful of Dollars. Well, it's the same character, isn't it?
Is it the same? Is it because he's after all he has different names in each of the different films.
He's Joe in the first one.
Yeah, it was Joe Blondie, whatever his name is, or it was the man with no name sort of thing. But it's loosely, I would kind of say, it's loosely the same character, spiritually the same character. But the jury's out on it for various reasons.
Yeah. So yeah, there was a bit of a sort of hoo-ha around this. But having said that, everything just moved so much quicker back then. I mean, we remember Bond films were coming out one a year at this time. They managed to get the film out and have a lawsuit in between, and still get it out a year later.
Oh, how times have changed, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. It normally stops production in its tracks. But as with the first film, obviously delayed in the United States, they didn't see it for a couple of years. And I suppose the first thing before we go into what happened to quality, what we think of it, if anything, was I was very surprised to see Klaus Kinski pop up. I completely forgot he was in it. Obviously, career of his own, don't get me wrong, but probably known to slightly younger audiences as the father of Natasha Kinski.
I think if you're a fan of German cinema or German expressionist cinema, then you'll be familiar with Kinski, Fitzcarraldo, things like that.
I think the only other thing I'd like to say up front is we've had conversations before, largely when we talk about Bond, but I mean the poster boy example is the governor of the Bank of England in Goldfinger, who's about 38 and looks about 62. Do you remember? Yeah. You know that guy?
Yeah.
Richard something.
Yeah, he appears in A Hard Day's Night as well.
Yeah. Well, Lee Van Cleef was 40. He was 40 when this comes out, and he looks mid to late 50s.
Well, yeah, we were having this discussion on one of the various James Bond radio threads that I'm a part of as well. They're saying like I think he was only a couple of years older than Connery when Goldfinger came out, or something like that. There wasn't very much between them in terms of age, but he looks like 60 or something.
He was born in 1925 or something like that, but it was late in the year, so the chances are he was still in his 30s filming this.
Yeah, but he looks a lot older, and I think that people obviously aged differently. Well, not differently, but all perceptions of age were certainly different to what they are now. Obviously.
Some of it is balding and greying, which isn't technically sort of age related.
Or it could be makeup.
You can go balding. You can go bald and grey fairly young. If I tried to grow hair now, I wouldn't do it super successfully. But yeah, it just everything about people in this era looks that much older. Clint, I think Eastwood is still in his 30s at this point. He's mid 30s, and that they all look 40s and up.
Yeah. So how old was Van Cleef at this point?
Let me just look it up. I looked it up earlier, but just because of that thing. He was born early in 25. January 1925 he was born. Died in the late 80s. He didn't make a massively high age. He died of a heart attack, but they found sort of throat cancer as a contributing factor as well. But it always it's always noticeable when you know someone went from that and then you see them smoke their way through films. But so I'm not quite sure without looking when it was actually filmed. I'm just looking now to see if I can see it. I can't readily see it, but it was released later in 1925, certainly in Italy. But post-production times didn't have such a lead time, so I imagine it was shot in 65. I don't know if Charlie knows.
I'm not 100% sure, to be honest with you.
But yeah, he's around the 40 mark, so to put that into perspective, he's 5 or 6 years younger than me and looks significantly older than I do now. And 3 of us on this call are older than he is in this film, and he looks older than all 3 of us.
The thing is, though, he does look like... I mean, yes, by today's standards, he looks older, but
he looks fit, though.
But yeah,
he still looks physically, he's not decrepit or anything.
Even by the setting that they're in, you could say, oh yeah, he could be 40, he could be 40, he could be 50, he could be 60. You know what I mean? He looks like he looks kind of like he could be. He's got this 30 years. He could be anywhere between there, really.
Yeah. The funny thing about when you lose your hair, and Patrick Stewart's proof of this, although he's aged a lot in the last 10 years. But people panic about losing their hair because they think it makes them look old. But the moment you've lost it, you're kind of timeless. If he'd shaved his head, you wouldn't know how old he was.
No.
Yeah, I think Yul Brynner said that when he sort of shaved his head, he kind of found it quite liberating because it kind of...
Yeah, I look younger now. I'm bald rather than balding.
Yeah.
There you go.
Because we know what they say about bald guys, so...
I was reminded of... Well, it doesn't suit everybody. I'm one of the few exceptions. I was dreading and then it was finished, and I'm like, oh, I wish I'd gone bald years ago. It actually suits me. But the thing that I also thought of watching this film, and again, this is something Charlie will be very familiar with, the Sabata trilogy, which I think I talked during the last show. Because not only was Van Cleef the lead in those films, but they dressed him rather dapper like this. So I don't know if it was sort of based on the same idea, because he certainly dresses like a sort of gentleman outlaw.
It probably was. I mean, it's funny because you're talking about Eastwood's character. Van Cleef is in The Good, Bad and the Ugly as someone completely different as well.
Yeah. I haven't seen that for a few years, so I'll have to be revisiting that again.
Going back to Klaus Kinski. Klaus Kinski was in quite a few spaghetti westerns. And it was like kind of a mini career for him. And he's the villain in The Great Silence.
Oh, I can't wait to see that. I've heard, I've sort of, I've done a shallow dive into it, in that, like, I don't want to do a deep dive in because although I'm okay with spoilers, I'd rather not. I'd rather just watch it. So I'm trying to read around the film without finding out too much about the film, which is quite a difficult balancing act. So other characters, Klaus Kinski, for those of you who aren't familiar with him, just picking out high-profile films he was in. Dr. Zhivago sticks out. I seem to remember him a little bit later in his career, and I'm just trying to spot what was it I saw him in much later, much closer to his death.
He was in the remake of Nosferatu, because he worked a lot with Werner Herzog.
Right, okay, yeah, I think they were quite close in their personal life, weren't they?
Yeah.
Fitzcarraldo, with Werner Herzog. I'm looking for stuff I've seen. I have a feeling I've seen James Toback's Love and Money. The Little Drummer Girl, I'm assuming that's based on the Le Carre novel. He was in that, so that's going to be a sort of very 80s Euro thriller, which is sort of how I picture him, but there you go. But yes, passed away a long time ago. Did a little bit of television as well, yeah.
And I had no idea it was, just Klinsky was his daughter. I had no idea.
Yes, and actually there is a passing resemblance, but only once you know.
Yeah.
It's not obvious until someone points it out, and then you go, yeah, I can see that, actually. Relatively, it's very much a secondary role in the film. Obviously, we've got... what's the actor called? It's Volonte, isn't it?
Yeah.
The lead, who obviously we saw last week. Funnily enough, I always thought of him first from A Fistful of Dollars, but this is arguably a bigger, much more commanding role. Let's start with some. I suppose we can sort of mix in when we first saw it and what we thought of it. So, is this a first view for everyone except myself and Charlie?
A second view.
When did you see it before? Do you remember?
Yeah, well, it was basically it's for me the trilogy is the same as it was last week. Well, I say last week.
I was going to say I don't remember what you
last
said.
episode.
Weren't even a thought when we last talked about it.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it was like it was on like a Channel 4 or something like that. Like I think it was summer '99.
Right.
I think around that sort of time, and I watched them all like for the first time, full on, like as they were showing like 1 week it was, you know, they did it like week by week. Like, I think it was on the Sunday. So I watched it then. And then actually no, I've watched it twice again now because it's the second viewing for this podcast. Because I watched it, you know, anticipating to do recording then. Yeah,
we were going to.
So, So it's only really up to now.
That was directly, without giving too much of Chris's personal life away, that is directly that the baby was premature. We still thought we had a couple of months to record a few shows. Yeah.
Baby came home and it's like, oh, okay.
One day he said, can we put this off on my dad? I'm like, oh yeah, sure. I was expecting that.
Well, you had an extra special reason to, so, you know, it's not just any old, I don't fancy it for a couple of months. We had, you know, genuine reason, so it's all right.
But if I give any sort of lame jokes, then that's allowed now because...
Yeah. Dad jokes.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got license for them now, so
it's allowed. It's all legal.
But yeah, you know, I've already seen it the once before, preparing for the podcast.
Did you remember before you watched it for the original recording? Did you remember much of it? Was it all sort of fresh when you watched it again?
Yeah, I mean, because it was such a long time. Because I remember broadly what Dollars Fistful of Dollars was about because the story is more well known. This one less so, other than I knew it was like I knew like broadly you had like Lee Van Cleef and it was basically like him and Eastwood going at it with the bad guy with the what's it called, it's like is it a pocket watch, but it's like
a pocket watch, yeah,
but it had like a chine. So I didn't know if I couldn't remember, but it was that kind of thing, and like facing off at the end, and I knew there was like, so I knew broadly, but if you'd asked me to explain the plot, I don't think I'd be able to. But like I remember like sort of the main like moments, so to speak.
And what did you think of it?
This time round, or
this time round.
This time round, I'm trying to decide whether but I think I liked it more than the last film, simply because it seems to have more meat on the bones, and you've got not only got Eastwood, you also got Lee Van Cleef, and the chap who does the is it I'm going to pronounce his name, is it Volonte?
Go with Volonte.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who can't pronounce the name. I do apologise.
His villain role is a lot more memorable as well, a lot more like beefed out, and a lot more. He's more dastardly, but a bit more interesting as well.
Yeah, I blame Back to the Future Part 2 for remembering him from the other film more.
Yeah, there's that, I guess. But
because this is just so much better that way.
But yeah, it's kind of like similar in terms of like, you know, who's playing who, trust, double crossing, you know, that kind of thing, you know, sort of like, you know, Eastwood like sort of joins the gang, albeit for a short while, you know, that kind of thing, and then gets found out, gets beaten up, and then you get like the climax at the end. But yeah, I think for money, I think I actually enjoyed it more than the last film. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, so yeah, this is like the second or third time I've seen it. Obviously, for last time was the first time. Because I'm quite embarrassed to admit, obviously with Chris being of the Action Junkie podcast, and Dave and Charlie obviously, being the resident film buffs, a lot of these films on our list are ones that we covered. So obviously apart from the Bond films, Back to the Future, Indiana Jones, quite a few. So yeah, various films on our review schedule. I've either not seen in eons or have not seen at all. Like Lethal Weapon, for example. And then as soon as I knew that we were going to be doing them on the podcast, I thought, right, I'll save myself, and then pop that cherry when it came to it. Yeah, this is probably like the second or third time, but yeah, it's the same really. I mean, these films are across like the Western action genre, even sci-fi as well. They cast a long shadow, and Leonie's a legendary director whose influence is found far across all kinds of different types of films and genres. But yeah, it was the second time round. It's one of those films that you really have got to pay attention to, because it is, even though it's 2 hours. It's probably just my little brain, I don't know. You've got to kind of pay attention to kind of like who's double crossing who's kind of plotting against who. And some of the shootout scenes are really, really intense as well. And there's quite a lot of things that you perhaps might, I don't know, maybe in the 70s and 80s. I mean, there's a rape scene, smoking weed, all kinds. Anything goes in this movie, that perhaps you may not see now, or you may see in today's cinema, but only done perhaps in a certain stylized way, or perhaps be slapped with an 18 certificate. Yeah, sort of points of it I did sort of remember, but yeah, so perhaps I didn't remember it as well, perhaps, but it was a couple of months ago, and I've had a few nice holidays in between, and had a crazy time busy at work as well, so I perhaps didn't remember it as well as perhaps I should have done. But no, it sounds really sad, but also because my late granddad was a big fan of, obviously, his generation, go with sort of like 40s, 50s, that sort of thing. Also a big fan of like war movies, detective films, westerns as well. And it was always rather embarrassing to me that this particular trilogy I'd never actually got around to seeing. So I'm kind of glad that we're doing it now, after mentioning it on a podcast years ago. And yeah, I'm just really excited to deep dive into it, really, to be honest. So, and having Charlie as well, with knowledge of film music, I think it would just make the experience even better.
Do you want to go next, Charlie?
Yeah, not too much pressure.
Oh yeah, sorry.
No.
I don't mean to add any pressure. I just,
I really appreciate it. Yeah, I think it's probably my favourite of the three. I think it's interesting that if you look at the films in sequence, obviously with The Good, the Bad, the Ugly next time, Leone seems to, I guess maybe if he's got his confidence or whatever, kind of goes up the scale in terms of how operatic the films are, and that's certainly why I like this one, is because it's very intense and very operatic because of the way the kind of storyline threads together, especially with Van Cleef's character, and I think also having Eastwood and Van Cleef together, a kind of precursor to kind of buddy comedies, essentially. They have such good chemistry as well, and also Valenti as well, who is, again, he's incredibly charismatic, despite being a clearly despicable man, and the kind of things we see him do, and there's kind of like a depth to him as well.
He was just a rancid bad guy last time out. You know what I mean? There was just more here.
Yeah, he seems more magnetic this time around, rather than just an out bastard. Excuse my language.
Yeah, there's a real kind of sense of depth and kind of melancholy, and the use of the pocket watch as well is a lovely touch, and yeah, the action's great as well, and it's exciting and it's funny, and yeah, it's just a great film. Yeah.
I also felt it was a bit of a precursor to, because the reveal of like who Van Cleef is like, or the reason why he's after Valente. What's his name in the film? It's
good question. What's his character?
India. You know, it kind of reminds me of Once Upon a Time in the Rest. You know that. You know,
with the harmonica.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of feels like it's kind of a precursor to that. But
I'd argue it buries the lead better than Once Upon a Time in the West. Actually, I prefer, from memory, and I always approach things fresh. I think I prefer Once Upon a Time in the West. That's one of my favourite films, full stop. But there was clearly something going on with Bronson's character, and it's not actually as obvious here until you get to the end and realise they both got the same pocket watch, etc.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
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 But there's like a stark difference between like Eastwood and Van Cleef are like kind of polar opposites, like, as well as like not just in the style, the way they dress, their technique,
their manner around people as well.
Yeah, but also their methods are like there's a bit where you see Indigo's wanted poster, and they're both kind of seen at the same time. Eastwood eyes goes straight to like the award money, and Van Cleef's eyes just go like dead or alive, and he zeroes in his eyes on the eyes on the poster. He just kind of he just instantly, without any dialogue, you know exactly what their motivations are.
I love the fact the other two wanted posters you see are like really crudely drawn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the one of him looks like a fucking Andy Warhol painting.
It does, you know.
He's laughing as well.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Flip the shot, trace over that. That's it.
Yeah, and that's what it looks like.
You
You could do a screen print or something from it.
I saw the trilogy. I said some of this in the last episode, but I saw the trilogy on a box set in about 2003, just after Once Upon a Time in the West had got like a restoration and a DVD release and all the rest of it. As I think I said, the little inset picture we're using at the time of recording on our social media is effectively the DVD cover from that set. And funnily enough, I remembered this film worst of the three, because the bit where is it they go fairly late in the film, where they sort of go to that sort of smallish village, and he notices Van Cleef is there as well, where he's shooting the fruit out of the tree. I misremembered that totally as them hunting each other at that point, so I'd misremembered a lot of the plot. And I think part of it also was I had, again, this is from memory, so anyone with the set might tell me I'm wrong. But although none of the restorations, none of the picture qualities were great at that point, I seem to remember the good and the bad. The good, the bad, and the ugly had the worst print. And so I didn't warm to that as well as when I watched them all again a few years later, restored. So I liked this film best of the three. The first film seemed a bit proof of concept. This film felt a lot more meat on the bones. And the first time round, I just didn't get the good, the bad, and the ugly quite as much as I did on a rewatch. So this one just stood out as in that sweet spot of just the perfect length, perfect plot. More than once, even though it gets referred to as loosely the plot of A Fistful of Dollars, I thought of License to Kill watching this film a couple of times, where he was sort of ingratiating himself with a fairly loyal but quite despicable bad guy. And I had a really good time with it tonight. What I really like about it is that it's a little bit like A Fistful of Dollars in that it was simple and complex at the same time. If someone said, what are the main beats of A Fistful of Dollars, you could tell them in 3 or 4 sentences. But there's quite a bit of detail to go through if you want to. And this film's the same. I mean, the first 28, 29 minutes are nothing but exposition. The first 29 minutes or so are just set up. Both of them getting into town, working out who they are, having them bounty hunt so you can see an example of what they do. Very much referred to as bounty killers, not bounty hunters. There's that opening bit in the film, isn't there? That's why, basically life is meaningless when death has a price, and that's why the bounty killers came rather than bounty hunters. Quote at the start of the film, yeah. But you've also, because they're arriving in the town separately, their interactions are with the townsfolk, not each other initially. So you get a sense of their differing characters. So Van Cleef gets himself. We'll go through it in order in a bit, but at the very start, he gets off a train illegally, pulling the sort of stop on it, and although he's wary of him, the guard goes up to him and says, "Well, you're not really supposed to do that." If that had been Clint Eastwood, I think he'd have been too scared to go up to him. So I think that they carry a very different quality to them. Lee Van Cleef is a little bit more gentlemanly in his bearing, and not just the way he's dressed. You get introduced to El Indio. You get introduced to he's obviously broken out early in the film. Then you get whether Van Cleef knows he's going to go back to that town. I don't know. That all seems a bit. That's almost like a plot hole. Like, did he find him by accident? You also get a bit of intrigue set up around. He's clearly, this pocket watch takes him back to a previous time where he's remembering this crime he committed that involved murder, and it appears rape, although the first time you don't see the rape, you just get the inference it's about to happen. So that and he's taking some sort of drug to sort of deal with the stress of the memories of that, and we don't know what that is till later in the film. And we get the sort of bounty hunters sort of encountering each other for the first time, and all of that takes about the first half an hour of the film, and not once does it drag. And then we have a little bit of intrigue with how they sort of set up him being ingratiated into the group, how they come to a sort of accommodation with each other, how they Mortimer and Manco, isn't it? And then how he sort of sets up this bank heist to distract from the main bank heist, which we'll come to. And it's just all very, very well plotted. The other thing is, whatever version I was watching tonight looks presumably restored, because it looked really nice. It's a pretty film. You can still see that it's slightly low budget. Cost about $600,000, took about 25 million. So it was solidly successful and cost a lot more than A Fistful of Dollars. The town is clearly a bit bigger, but it's still not as expansive as we'll see once we get to sort of Once Upon a Time in the West and things like that. But it's still, they've got a bit more money here. They've got a bit more time to think about what they're writing and actually put a bit more meat on it. And I was nothing but deeply impressed. Having said that, with the reputation of The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, I'd be very surprised if I don't end up preferring it, because what I saw tonight wasn't transcendent, but it was solid. I really liked it.
Obviously, before when we come to the end of a series, sometimes obviously it was like Bond or India or any kind of like really big overarching series. As a podcast, we traditionally kind of rank them. I don't know if we'll do it with this one. I don't know if there's.
It won't be a ranking episode, but there's nothing wrong.
No,
with it.
well, no, exactly, because it's not really a long series as well, is it? I mean, it's literally just with this film. It's 3 films really with this trilogy. Obviously.
Be very useful for Tolkien, won't it? Particularly the Peter Jackson ones. They declined in a straight line.
Well, yeah, this is it. So
First one's the best, last one's the worst.
Again as well, but I don't know if there's. Yeah. I'm really showing my ignorance here, and I can only apologise to all you fans who are going to be screaming at me. So I hold my hand up. But with this one, is there kind of like, is there like an official ranking? Like, I don't know. Obviously, they're all hugely famous, both together as a trilogy and individually. And cannot be understated how influential these films are, certainly. But is there kind of like a preferred ranking with these? Like, is
The Good, the Bad and the Ugly is the most.
Is that generally like the best one, or how does it go?
It's not about whether we think it's the best. I'm just answering it's generally the most lauded of the 3.
Yeah, that's the impression that I was going under as well.
It's not the most lauded of his westerns, because you could argue Once Upon a Time in the West is, but even then that would be debatable. The trilogy,
I would assume that's what I would assume.
I would say Good, Bad, and Ugly is like probably the most well known. It's like
the most famous.
Yeah, if you'd sort of like go to approach like random people on the street and ask them to name a western, I think Good, Bad, Ugly would probably, they'd say more than say A Fistful of Dollars.
Sure.
No one's going to say a few dollars more, but that's just because it's the middle film.
It sounds like a sequel, doesn't it? For a few dollars more, it's like we can scream, but it's a title that almost sounds like, hey, we can squeeze a few more quid out of this franchise.
Yeah, literally.
But I think the Dollars trilogy kind of like is almost like comes as a package almost. I think some people would say Fistful of Dollars is better. Some probably would say Good, the Bad, the Ugly, but and some people might even say this as well. Like, but I think really it's more down to like what are you more familiar with rather than what's actually better.
You have to remember as well, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is somewhere approaching or around the 3-hour mark, so probably fewer people have sat through it all. So I would suggest there's more people who know it by reputation than have actually sat through, whereas more people will have sat through Fistful of Dollars because it's, 90 minutes?
And the music.
Yeah.
The
And the music, yeah.
It's probably the most culturally referenced one of the three as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I can't wait to get to it because I've largely forgotten it, but there's more, as I recall, there's more ideas in it. There's more commentary on the world they're in. That we've got yet.
It's set during the Civil War. So.
Yeah, so it's got more to say. This is still not a caper, because a caper implies a bank robbery is a caper. It's not a caper film as such, but it's got that element of just like a diverting little plot about bad guys and slightly less bad guys.
Yeah.
So yeah, to discuss this film sequentially, I've just noticed the old guy on the train who sat opposite Lee Van Cleef was 39 when this was shot as well. He looks about 70.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? They all look older than what they actually were. But I think perceptions of age have certainly changed, and also you got makeup, costume, one thing another. The fact that it was bloody hot, you could see that's one amazing thing about obviously the director. But you could just see the sweat dripping off their faces. Oh my god!
It's really odd, like perception of time, because like it looked like shows like sort of in the late 80s and things like that, and game shows, and you see people and they reveal their ages, and you're like, what, really? Like there's someone who goes like, oh, I'm Sue and I'm 19, and you're thinking she looks 31. What the hell's going on?
The bubble perm and massive glasses.
Yeah, but I think a lot of it is like sort of like hairstyles and fashion and whatnot. But I don't know, it's got to be more to that, surely. But anyway.
And the fact that most Bullseye contestants probably smoked 60 a day, lived in a pub and ate turkey Twizzlers, you know?
Well, that's it, diet and lifestyle, and that probably had a bit
there
more
was
of
there was a subsection of society specifically that went on that show.
Exactly. But that was, going back to Goldfinger, that always shocks me that, he looks like he could be in like 50s or 60s, but actually he was like late 30s, early 40s, and it's just like, what the bloody hell,
Yeah, for those wondering what we're talking about, everyone listening to this has seen Goldfinger. The scene where, fairly early in the film, after Jill Masterson's been killed and all the rest of it, and they go after the M scene, this is not a personal vendetta. He asks him to come back that evening, black tie, for a meeting with the governor of the Bank of England, who gives him the gold bar to use as he wishes. Now, if you can picture that guy in your head, you're picturing a guy that you're probably imagining his late 50s, early 60s, and he was actually about 38. And
it looks like he's 50.
Like we said, it's almost like he got all his aging out the way, because he was appearing in sitcoms 15, 20 years later looking exactly the same.
Yeah, he looks the same.
Yeah. So, we have what we later find to be Colonel Douglas Mortimer. And he's on a train heading into town. The town is called Tucumcari, which, not to step on all of Becca's fun facts, but I did read one of the ambiguities of this film is that town wasn't actually formed in reality till the 20th century.
No, it's a bit of a fake for now, isn't it?
Yes.
So this film was set in 1870 something.
No.
No.
This is where I've got a bit of a question that doesn't have to be answered. I don't think it's that important. But he's on a train that doesn't stop at the station. It goes through it. So he pulls the emergency cord, much like you still get on trains now. So it's normally a button rather than a cord now. And you can stop a train. Obviously, you get fined for illegal use of it now, but it's there if there's an emergency. Now, why is he on this train that doesn't stop there? Why does he feel the need to stop it illegally? It's almost like he doesn't want to buy a ticket to this place. And given El Indio is still in prison at this stage, it's not like he's expecting to find him in the town at this point. So this sequence confuses me beyond, is it just a shorthand for this guy just lives by his own rules, but he does it fairly politely?
So he's gone to a lot of trouble as well, because he gets his horse off the train as well.
He gets his horse off.
He's got his horse on there too.
So how I read it, and I could be wrong. So I got a feeling that given that he was always intended to get off there. Now the train does go through that area, but it doesn't stop because it's deemed like too dangerous. It's too rough of an area.
Is that what it is? It's too rough a place.
That's the impression I got, because like when he gets off, like the guy's in a rush to sort of close up and get the train back moving, because it's like there's no intent of stopping because of it's just full of like wrong uns. Right. Now that's the impression I got. Now he was going there anyway to get the bounty on this other guy who he goes to, because the next scene he goes to
Callaway.
He picks up a bounty and gets the guy while he's having an offer with a lady, and then it's after that he sees the wanted poster for
he doesn't see El Indio quite this yet, because obviously we get him capturing someone, and it leads me on to a related question. The related question is, and again, I had an answer to this 3 months ago, but I can't remember what the answer in my head was. So then we see Clint come into town, find a bounty of twice as much, go and sort that bounty out, take him to the sheriff, and then he takes the sheriff's badge and walks outside and says to people, "You're going to need a new sheriff." And I'm thinking, why? Is the implication the sheriff isn't doing anything and they're reliant just on these bounty hunters?
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, because
that would add to the idea that it's a town you don't want to stop in, because they've got a guy wearing a badge who's doing nothing.
Yeah, because he kind of scolds the sheriff, and the sheriff kind of admits that he's not doing his job.
Right. And again, that falls into sort of the type of character that Eastwood plays. He's kind of like a figure of justice in a way. It's like I mean, as a man, he's like there for the money, but like as a caricature, he's like. It's not justice in the typical sense of I'm gonna grab a gun and clean this town. It's more of a deeper sense of like, you're not doing your job. Like, I'm just gonna tell you how it is.
You're relying on men like me.
Yeah.
And this was very true, and I won't keep on about it because actually it shows a dearth of knowledge that I keep referring back to Sabata because I've seen so few different spaghetti westerns. But it reminded me of that in that throughout the films, and particularly in the first one, he'd do the right things but not for the right reasons. I remember in that first film, he does it for the sake of, he does whatever he does for $5,000, which is obviously 5 times as much as what he's doing here. This is Lee Van Cleef. But he ends up doing the right things. But it's, you'll pay me though. And I quite like the way, and again, different styles are very efficient with Van Cleef's. With Eastwood's, there's a bit more of a playfulness to it. He goes in and the guy's like playing cards. And the gamble is on his life.
Yeah. So there's obviously Eastwood's like Eastwood. I think we all kind of know like the Eastwood's kind of style, whereas Van Cleef is a lot more like he's a bit more business. He's got his like assortment of guns. He's got his like gadgets. He prefers sort of do things more long range as well, things like that. But the other thing I picked up on the watch it tonight is. He doesn't drink as well. Like when he goes to the barn and he wants his information. He wants to like, right, what room? Like he's like there like denying like any whiskey or anything like that. He's like, right. He smokes, but he doesn't drink.
And he's got his guns all like really properly arranged on the side of his horse and things like that. They're both as talented, but Eastwood is going around. It wouldn't be a surprise because we think of the character almost as emotionless, but it wouldn't be a surprise if he was walking around with a grin on his face. He always seems vaguely amused by it all.
Mm.
Would you agree with that,
what Van Cleef?
Yeah, no, Eastwood.
Eastwood, Eastwood's always got a kind of grin on his face, and he's a lot more kind of aloof, a lot more off the cuff. Whereas Mortimer Van Cleef is, like you said, he's got his guns. He's very kind of methodic about what he does. Yeah,
he has a plan, doesn't he?
And again, for those following us on social media, I think we put up a GIF last night just to sort of announce we were recording tonight, and it's Eastwood turning to shoot 3 people, and it's from this. He basically goes to bring these 3 guys down, and like his crew arrive in the doorway, and he sort of takes them all out and the other guy, and you've got that strange, and I think it's budgetary, and I said it last time, you got that strange disconnect between it being bloodless and brutal.
Yeah, because he shoots the guy without looking as well, doesn't he? The one reaching for his gun.
But they all go down without wounds. The only wound you see is the one that's delivered off camera, and then the camera goes down on the woman, the rape victim.
Yeah.
Because they can make up that on ahead of time rather than squibs and all the rest of it. So it's got a strange feel to it. You would think, oh, they've pulled their punches, but then you look at the sort of subject matter and the way people are taken out so ruthlessly. It's not pulling his punches at all. It's just not got the money. But that's really the first sort of act of the film. We're introduced. I suppose the end of the first act of the film would be the release of Indio. Indio's kind of a bandit who's been in prison. I think it's a life sentence. I don't know if that's ever said, but that's the implication. And his crew basically break him out. And it's brutal. I think they kill all but one. And it's that typical what's now a trope of I'm leaving you alive, tell everyone about me. And the next thing we see, he laughs uproariously, which made me think of Austin Powers. And then it cuts to the wanted poster, and he's wanted for 10 grand. So again, not only is the 2 previous bounties shown us what our bounty hunters do and how their styles are different to each other, but it gives you the stakes here, that he's 10 times the value Van Cleef was going for to start with.
Yeah, and then we get the scene where he goes to confront the guy, put him away.
Yeah,
which adds to quite that brutality of it all.
Again, I was getting very Sanchez overtones, a bit like, give him his heart, give her his heart. You know what I mean? It was, again, it doesn't have the bloodletting, but it's needlessly sadistic. They could have put a bullet in him straight away, but they had to have him listen to his wife and child being shot outside. I suppose the only thing more brutal would have been if they'd done it in front of him, but I think even if this film would have struggled to kill a young child on screen. And then what is a fantastic piece of reaction acting from the guy, he's then forced to play a game where they draw at the end of this sound from the pocket watch, which once you hear it, you'll never forget it. It's very memorable. The little piece of music.
Oh yeah, as the music sort of tenses up as well.
It slows down as the winding mechanism wears out or runs down.
It's an interesting technique, isn't it? As well, it's like it's one of those kind of things that's really iconic about the film as well. Once you've heard it, cannot unhear it.
But if you think about it, to round off this act, we've had who the bounty hunters are, what the town is like, what some of the people in the town are like the kid trying to get him to buy a room and all the rest of it. The bad guy's been broken out. You've seen how he operates. You've seen he takes instant revenge, and then he sits down, remembers a murder stroke implied rape at this stage. We actually see it later. It's not too graphic, but it's very obvious what's happening. And he sits there with the pocket watch and gets stoned. So this guy's got some damage on him from this previous crime. We don't necessarily link the pocket watch to it directly. I suppose if you thought about it and you'd seen Once Upon a Time in the West, you may put it together, but I didn't really think about it. And that's Act 1. And what an Act 1. It's given us everything we need.
It's busy, isn't it? It's a busy film. There's a lot going on.
That's probably about the first 40 minutes of the film or so.
I mean, it's 2 hours long, but I mean, it doesn't drag any of it. But this is what I mean. You got to pay attention. It's really packed. You're not bored for any point in the film.
So I would say
packed into its hours.
Broadly speaking, the second act of the film is about our 2 bounty hunters making an accommodation with each other in a plan. So what do we want to say about this?
So they're casing the bank, aren't they?
Yes.
And obviously they're observing the bandits. The
bounties, the bandit, they're counting like steps and things like that. Like everything runs like clockwork. So it's X number of steps that you can count, and by that point they'll be round this corner and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, straight out and straight into bank robberies, which is a bit dramatic, I suppose. But he's gonna, this is El Paso now at this point. And the safe, we're told, holds nearly $1 million, which is just an insane amount of money for this era.
Yeah, I mean, isn't like the reward and things like that. They're always inflated to. I don't think bounties were this high.
I've no idea.
Because that would be insane. Like, not many people. I don't think there'd be that much money in circulation.
Well, you'd be retiring after one, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, you were. I mean,
when they post this 10 grand reward, they're talking about like he'll buy a place and retire on it, on his share of it. Because of course they start off with Eastwood tries to run him out of town. He basically tells the staff at the hotel, bar, whatever it is, to like take it to the station. He's leaving.
And then he steps on his shoes.
Then he steps on his shoe, which I always think is really petty.
Yeah.
And then he kind of starts shooting at his hat every time he goes to pick it up.
Mm.
And then Van Cleef sort of replies by just shooting his hat while it's in the air several times. And I just remember thinking, why don't they whip their dicks out and see which one's bigger? Because it is a bit juvenile, isn't it? But they end up coming to an accommodation.
It is. It's kind of like they're having a stand down without killing each other.
Yeah.
Essentially what they're doing.
They're showing each other's talent level to say, do you really want to mess with me?
Yes.
I think.
Absolutely, yeah.
When is it Mortimer meets Klaus Kinski's character? Because they come back into each other later, don't they?
Yeah. So this happened. This happens before Eastwood and Van Cleef meet before. So this is like when they arrive in town. He's at the bar and he has an altercation with the hunchback.
Wild, he's called. Yeah. He's got a very sort of slight hunch on his back. Yeah. If you've not seen the film, it's probably not what you've got in your head. When you think of a hunchback, you think of something a bit more over the top than this, but he definitely has a hunch. So Van Cleef has already kind of marked their cards, let's put it that way. And they tried. They don't end up fighting. So where do we go from there? How does Manco get involved in the crew? They're both watching them case the bank, so they notice each other, don't they?
Yeah. So, so after they decide to come after the shooting match, they decide to come together.
They meet in like the hotel room for a
tells
drink
him,
and a chat.
You join their gang, and he does that by getting Eastwood sort of breaks out another one of his men.
That's right. This guy's got, I can't remember I think it's 4 years this guy's got, so he's not in prison forever. But he breaks him out and takes him right back to where they'd shot the guy who put him in prison in the first place. They're still hanging out there, I think, at that point. And it feels high stakes because he immediately visibly doesn't trust Eastwood.
Yeah.
But he kind of lets him get involved. And they decide they're going to rob a bank in a different town first. And he's sent to do that. Santa Cruz it is. And it's to basically get them to call into El Paso, so El Paso's law enforcement head over that way and leave the bank undefended. But on the way there, so they send Eastwood off with 3, I think, of his guys. And Eastwood shoots them all on the way. And then goes and finds the guy who sends all the telegrams. Basically says, send a message saying you've just been robbed. And then he ties him up and gags him. And I love the fact that Van Cleef comes across him and shoots him. He actually shoots Eastwood, just grazes him on the neck.
Yeah.
And he basically says, you're new to his crew, you're new in town, you're about to go back, 3 of his men are dead. He's going to smell a rat.
Yeah.
At least now you've been in an altercation.
Yeah, at least at least now it's like semi-believable. Like,
Yeah. And basically, I mean, we're racing through it now because all the details in Act 1. I think we are straight onto the robbery now, aren't we? Really?
Yeah.
The main robbery. They break out the safe. The safe is considered to be incredibly difficult to crack. They sort of stand out in the middle of nowhere, shooting at the sort of cabinet around it to break it down. When they open it, it's a solid sort of safe. And Van Cleef offers to break into it for a proportion of the money.
So they have another altercation. So this is he arrives at in this other small town. Now doesn't Eastwood sort of say they were going to like sort of send them this way when Eastwood sends them like this way, and then Van Cleef sort of predicted that he'd like go against plan.
Yeah, because he says they should go. He says they should. The guy India says they're going north, and then Eastwood says they should go south. After telling Van Cleef that he was going north.
Yeah, and Van Cleef says to him, "I knew you'd do exactly the opposite of what I suggested." So they're really smart. They are in partnership, but they're quite happy to try and cut each other out. But at this stage, so they've robbed the money.
Yeah,
and he breaks into the safe. It's full of cash.
Yeah, but I was gonna say Van Cleef that shoots the Wild because Wild sees him at the bar and decides to.
Yeah, he goes for it, and that's it. He just pulls him out with that little tiny gun. Again, he had a very similar one in other films I've seen him in. So they reused the basics of this character.
And he's the only one that can open the safe as well.
Yeah, he's the only one that can open the safe, but a lot of drilling and all the rest of it breaks into it. And then they decide, and this bit sort of lost me, they decide to sort of lock the money up for a month. What was that about? I'm a bit confused as to why they did that. They've got the money there.
They just wanted to lay low for a little bit.
To let it all die down, rather than see. Okay. Yeah, I suppose that makes sense. So, they go to... What do we do now? Where do we go now?
So, I think it does move swiftly on now. So, don't they? They
go to this small sort of border, very Mexican town, don't they?
Mm.
And this is where I'd completely misremembered the film, because I just had memories of the two leads kind of stalking each other, and that's not what happened. That was earlier in the film where they caught each other watching. And I think I was getting a bit mixed up with Once Upon a Time in the West as well.
Maybe the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly as well.
Yeah, they were walking across.
Film, they are.
Yeah, it could be. But it was one of the fact that I misremembered it is almost unforgivable as well. Because if someone had said, "Why do you prefer the second film?" I would have pointed to that scene, and I couldn't even remember it properly. So they go into this town, and this is where he kills Wilde, and cracks the safe open. And sort of Manco and so we'll just go with Eastwood and Van Cleef. They meet up and plan to sort of steal the money.
Yeah.
And this is quite funny, and what it reminded me of was a really silly random thing. A few years ago, they put a super fence around Glastonbury, because for years people were going to Glastonbury Festival for free. You know, there'd be officially 100,000 people there, but it would be like 300. So they nearly lost their license. The town council of Pilton or whatever it is were voting every year, and it was squeaking through for them to get their license. They said, the town is filling up with people. Those who can't get into the festival are going to cause problems. And the last year they squeaked it through on the basis of you put in a super fence. Actually, it got worse the first year, because a lot of people turned up thinking they could get in, and when they didn't, they went and caused trouble in the local town. But anyway, the first year, there was one reported case of someone scaling the fence. Unfortunately, they landed right in the security guards area. So they worked out how to get under or over this fence and landed. It's like breaking into the police station. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it reminded me of that because they go to break in and Eastwood's feet lands on El Indio. So they now get the shit kicked out of them. And that's quite brutal. They really do get the shit kicked out of them.
Mm.
And they're basically locked up. And this is the bit where he does diverge from the sort of Sanchez analogies, in that Sanchez was, at least until he ended up killing his own staff right at the end, he was fairly loyal if you were loyal to him. Well, actually turns out he's basically going to get someone to break them out, make it look like someone else did it amongst his crew, kill that person, and then basically send the rest of his crew after them in the hope that they'll all kill each other, and him and Nino, I think is called, will just split money.
Yeah.
Which is a cool little wrinkle. The film didn't need to think about it in that depth to keep our attention. I was quite impressed by that sort of little change. But of course, the thing that's gone wrong there is
it doesn't quite go to plan. So they said they essentially break Eastwood and Van Cleef out and then send the men after him. And think like, well, they'll kill themselves, we'll go off. But one of his men kind of catches on. What's his name? The
Groggy.
Which one?
Groggy,
that's it.
Groggy's the one that sort of catches on. I can't remember the name of the one that they the one that
I want to say, is it the
one that gets framed for it? The one that actually does the sort of killing to frame him is Nino.
Yeah,
and he reminds me.
Trucilla's knife.
That's the one. That's the one who gets framed.
And he kills Slim.
And the acting's really good because when he's framed for it, he looks at him really plaintively and says, "I didn't do this." But the one who actually stages the murder, the heavy set guy, visually he reminds me of Ian McShane's right-hand man in Deadwood. I don't know if any of you have ever seen Deadwood.
No, I want to watch Deadwood though.
Like it's on Paramount Plus. I've just started watching it because I had the discs years ago and didn't get through all of it. I'm only about 7 or 8 episodes in. But his right-hand man's like a fairly heavy-set, quiet guy, and they just look a bit similar. And again, you do wonder if there are all these influences. Like they go to the town of Amarillo, and you go, "Well, Amarillo is a real town," and then you think, "Well, what was it called in Red Dead Redemption? Armadillo." You just go like they do slightly reuse these things.
Is the guy they frame as the person who freed him?
Yeah,
and then is that the guy Eastwood freed to get in? Because it would make sense from a narrative point of view.
No, it wasn't. It was an older guy than that, I think. The scene we haven't talked about that I found odd but funny, and it was a sign of the humour. Funnily enough, I thought of Spock, because Spock was emotionless, but there was always an air of faint amusement about him, and it made me think of that when Eastwood was talking to the old guy who lived near the train line and was being driven slowly mad by it. I can't remember the point of that scene. What was the point of that scene with the old man who was a bit nuts? I mean, it was comic relief, really.
Wasn't it just get more information?
Yeah, but I can't remember what information he gets. But yeah, going back to this stage of the film, they now, of course, they join up and sort of take the gang down one by one. Pretty decent shot action for its time. Mortimer shoots Groggy as the outlaw runs for it. But then Indio appears and shoots his gun out of his hand, so he's a sitting duck. And then he decides to do the sort of dramatic pocket watch thing. So he stood there waiting to be shot as this sort of tune slows down.
And then Eastwood comes in with the other pocket watch.
And whilst I don't think the framing of faces is as strong in this film as the first one, or certainly Once Upon a Time in the West, I've seen that more, where he does the sort of landscape shot on faces. But the dropping of Eastwood's hand into shot with the watch in it is fantastic. Because that is like almost Kubrick-esque in that he's planned every element of the shot both
That's
guys.
so cool. I think that's probably one of the most
both,
favourite shots in the
both guys
film.
are in shot aren't in focus. Yeah, and the
Yeah.
hand just drops in, and just as it slows down, just as you're waiting for, oh my god, the gunshot's about to ring out, it starts again from an identical watch.
It's so cool, isn't it? It's just brilliantly done. You just think, oh, it's incredible, and that's why it's iconic.
And whilst we're waiting for it, and also it doesn't focus on the sort of build up to the shooting quite as long. It can get very long, and it's certainly very long in Once Upon a Time in the West when we get the replay of why they're there. Eastwood takes him back his gun and just says, "There you are."
Yeah, I think
he looks at his
he
pocket
gives
watch.
Eastwood gives his gun to him because it's like
Is it? I
it's
thought
strapped
you were
because it kind of gives he's got like a equal gun, so it kind of makes it like now it's fair.
That's true because he only carried a little gun. The other thing I like is, I've lost my train of thought there. He hands him the gun, and while we're waiting, whilst he see that was it. When Eastwood drops his hand into shot, and we see the watch, Van Cleef looks at the chain, and he realizes he's had it taken from him. The film has made virtually nothing of that watch so far, so we just needed to be told explicitly whose watch that was.
Yeah,
And we don't know until afterwards. Again, in Once Upon a Time in the West, you get a flashback to harmonica as a child.
You know, Van Cleef's got a pocket watch, but you don't know it's the same one.
Yeah, well, pocket watches were what
Yeah.
they had if they had timepieces then.
Yeah.
So that means nothing other than he's dressed like a gentleman and he's got a watch. So, of course, to cut through it, he basically shoots Indio, kills him, and then explains the watch belonged to his sister.
Like family,
He actually says in the dub, he says he's her brother. Apparently, in the Spanish version, he says he's her father. Guess it doesn't really matter.
No. It works either way.
It kind of makes a bit more sense though, because that's kind of why he's so determined to to go there and sort it all out and everything. But
what had happened
I find that, to me, I think that makes it a little bit more sense.
I think so, and he basically, we get the full replay of what happened. He shot the guy, he raped his wife, and while he was busy raping her, she shot herself in the side. So she killed herself while he was doing what he was doing.
Yeah, trying to escape probable rape.
And then we've got one left. We got one left to kill because he's loading them all onto the sort of truck to take them back in for the reward. The colonel said, because it's personal to the colonel, he said, "You can keep the money, you earned it." And he's counting, and he gets to 22, and he's like, "That's not right." And then he realizes there's someone behind him. So there's one left. That's Groggy. Survived him. Injured, but he shoots him.
He shouts
And then
like,
he
"You
just-
alright?" It's like, "No, I thought the count was off. It's alright now."
It's all right now. I am now, he says. He doesn't make anything of it. And the film is just so subtle like that. And again, whilst I'm pretty sure I'll sit here in a couple of weeks' time and say I prefer the film we're talking about that night, there's a couple of things I appreciate in that we keep getting a slight replay that builds up in detail, and that's fantastic in itself. But when we eventually get the full replay of who Harmonica is when we see him as a child, it actually slightly cuts away the tension because it just slows down the scene. I'm glad we got it because it's being teased slowly all the way through the film, but at the same time, it would have slowed down this film if we'd had it here, and we didn't. And he didn't say, "Oh, I've only got 22 men, there's one missing." He just went, "22. Are you okay?" Bang. Yes, I am now. So final thoughts from me. I just really, really like this film. I had a great time with it. I think there's much more here than there is in A Fistful of Dollars. I think what struck me this time was not everything is spoon-fed to you. It's not a difficult plot. There's more to it, and it's more involved than A Fistful of Dollars. But at the same time, I could describe the plot to you fairly quickly, I'm sure. But at the same time, it doesn't spoon-fed all the detail. It lets you pick it up itself. It's got a wry humour to it. At no point does it go, "And here comes a joke," except that scene with the old guy. It's got a very intelligent plot. It's beautifully shot. It looks a bit more expensive than the first film, although it's still not vastly as such. I mean, there's still no blood in it or anything like that. But the thing I'd point to is the quality of the acting from everybody. There's no cheesiness in this, apart from the sort of comedy old man. The guy Cucella or whatever you just said to me he was called, when he's pleading for his life. It's only for a couple of seconds, but it's like
The comedy prophet, the old dude.
That's the comedy prophet. But the rest of them, they're all like really convincing, and El Indio just totally commands the screen. So you've effectively got three really high quality, charismatic leads, all distinct from each other.
And as you mentioned at the top of the show as well, he's a lot more complex this time around as well. I mean, he's just, he's generally kind of, in terms of all the Western genre, like especially this film, he's quite a memorable on-screen villain. But this time around, there's a lot more kind of layers to him as well.
There's more going on, yeah, absolutely, and you'll never sympathise with him. He's a rapist, but at the same time,
nasty.
But at the same time,
he's more charismatic with it.
That to happen in the act is not conflicting. You won't feel any different about him, but at the same time, that's a strangely traumatic thing to happen whilst you're doing something traumatizing. So
it's an odd thing because he hangs on to it as well and uses it. So so in a way he's like haunted by it, but yet he hangs on to it like it's sentimental to him. No, this means something, this defines me.
We don't know the backstory to this murder and rape at the start.
Yeah.
I mean, it's undoubtedly a rape because she's shown happily with her partner, husband, whatever that is at the start of the film. But we don't know the backstory. We don't know, did he have some attachment to this woman? And I certainly don't mean a relationship, but was he strangely in love with her from afar? I mean, we just don't know. And I don't suppose it's particularly
it's shot almost like dream-like, doesn't it? But it's very sinister, but it kind of has, it does have like this kind of like just dream-like nostalgia to it as well.
Is it scored, Charlie? Is this sequence scored? I can't remember.
I can't remember either, to be honest with you.
Do you know what it reminded me of? Which is scored, but strangely, I think of it as flashbacks where there aren't any scored. It made me think of Don't Look Now. But now that was a romantic love scene. That's different. But the strangely sort of fractured cut to it at the time, it reminded me of Don't Look Now. But yeah, that's it from me in terms of what I thought of it.
First one from I haven't seen for ages. Oh my god, I need to add that onto the list.
I watched it about this time. Well, I think I watched it on
maybe
Halloween.
next year for Halloween we could do
isn't it?
I don't know, a week of scary films.
I always
isn't it on iPlayer? I'm sure it's on BBC iPlayer. If it's,
I think it probably is.
I bought a copy of it on Prime anyway. It's on the iPlayer, yeah. But I always double bill it with The Wicker Man.
Yeah.
So
it was originally intended.
I would do it. That's how I would do the show, though. We do a one-off longer show, double billing the two of them.
Yeah, maybe maybe next year. That'd be cool.
Yeah, sure, all right.
Or something.
I know my wife would have. So I introduced my wife to both of them, and she loved both. She actually preferred The Wicker Man, but she loved both.
Oh wow.
Yeah. But sorry. So what final thoughts from you guys in whatever order?
Whoever would like to go next. Whilst I have a drink. Excuse me. I'm kind of towards the end of a cold, so I can only apologise for coughing and hacking all the way through this.
All right. Cool.
Yeah, it's a really great film. I kind of much prefer it to A Fistful of Dollars, and last time I saw The Good, Bad and the Ugly, I still preferred it, so I don't know how I'll feel after watching that next time. But yeah, it's just Eastwood and Van Cleef are both amazing, and it's a really kind of fun relationship, kind of competitive between them. Volante is amazing, and just a kind of layer of depth that the characters and the story has, really, and it feels pretty perfect, really.
Absolutely, and yeah.
To me, it's like it's a film with like essentially three leads. It's almost like a precursor to Good, Bad, and Ugly, to next week's movie, in a way. Though, again, my memory of that is gonna be particularly great. Other than
I remember the start. Very into the film. I remember the whole setup of the sort of grift they're pulling at the start of the film, but I don't remember much else.
But even though it's like it's a big sweeping epic, and it's essentially it's a prequel because Eastwood collects all his get up at the end is when it. But how that unfolds on
we never know what year these are set in. We know with A Good, the Bad and the Ugly is set during the Civil War, so it has to be between 1861 and 65. I don't know with these films if they're clearly and objectively set afterwards. I don't know.
I think there's a scene like really early on, like there's a character reading a newspaper or something, and it's like 1870 something. Like, but
Right,
like,
so
again,
definitely a
it's
prequel
one of these things that it can kind of be timeless, but obviously, yeah, with the next film, obviously it's dated during the Civil War, but like it kind of plays fast and loose. Really, it's a similar sort of thing. You know, one of these films kind of set. For me, it's similar up there with, like, as we talked about the argument at the top of the show. Like, is Manco the same character? Is he? Isn't he? Yeah, it's a bit kind of mysterious, I think.
Yeah, because
that's just my opinion anyway.
Some people do talk about it with the good, the bad, and the ugly set before these two, the first two, because as well it's kind of set during the Civil War.
Yeah.
Yeah, so really we should be starting with the first film and then working our way backwards.
Yeah, because on I read the money they steal is Confederate money.
I did notice that.
Yeah, that's true. Actually,
in tonight's film, I noticed when they opened the, I noticed the word, and I couldn't remember if it said Confederate or Confederacy. It said one or the other on the money. I noticed that.
Yeah.
Well, the Confederacy didn't exist after the Civil War, so I'm confused. I don't suppose it really matters.
Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, like, you know, what came first?
Chicken or egg?
Well, I mean, if it was a prequel and you watched them the wrong way round, when you got to A Fistful of Dollars, you would be like, "Is that it?" You know what I mean? The scale of these films just slowly being cut back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I guess it really doesn't matter because essentially Eastwood is basically playing the same character. Essentially, in all sense, but he is the same character. Whether like at what stage of his life, or he's just like he's always this kind of drifter character who comes in and does his thing. He just sort of interacts with. Yeah. And
again, there's not a lot of carryover, is there, from them? It's it's like with Bond. As the films went on, I mean, certainly in From Russia with Love, they mentioned Dr. No, and later after Majesties, they do mention Tracy once or twice, but it sort of doesn't matter if it's the same guy in the early films. Yeah, it matters, but it doesn't. If you want to see it as the same guy on his next mission, fine. If you want to see them all as completely separate, that's great. That is a beautiful baby, by the way. Chris sent a picture of his daughter, and I've only just looked at it.
Yeah.
This will sound like an insult to Chris because I've just said she's beautiful, and I don't mean it as an insult, but she looks like her mother. That doesn't sound like.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's for me it's the mouth, but a lot of people have said I can see both, so I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
She's got your eyes, Chris. Definitely.
Yeah, people said the eyes, nose. Yeah. She's got mine and ears as well.
Yeah.
She's definitely got mum's mouth.
The rest belongs to her mum.
So.
But so cute. Oh, a little face. He's so cute. Oh.
Yeah.
So I really like cute aggression. Actually, excuse me.
So what we're looking at, listeners, is a 4-month-old baby. July.
Yes. She would be 4 months.
This is the new Chris's baby cast. Welcome along.
4 months at last time she was weighed, she was just over £8. Which is you assume she was like sort of 2.5 pounds when she was born. So
you've been doing some growing.
Yes, definitely.
Well, I went to Romania at the end of June, and one of my wife's best friends had a daughter who turned 18 while we were over there. We went to her 18th birthday and she was born weighing a pound.
Oh.
They genuinely thought she would not make it, and it was 18 years ago as well.
She's 18, amazing.
Yeah. She's 18 and very, very gifted as well.
Yeah, you keep hearing stories like that, and it's just amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's incredible. It really is. And it's like, well done, good on you. Just carry on. That's fantastic. It's just amazing.
I mean, I've never had any concerns, really, because while she was born prem and was poorly, and given the extent of what she was,
she was in hospital quite a long time. I don't think we even realised because
no, well,
I We knew she was for a while, but like a few weeks, I'll probably get the timeline wrong, but for argument's sake, a few weeks in, Chris made some comment about going to the hospital to see her, and I was like, oh my God, she's not home yet. I didn't realise. Yeah. So,
But yeah, no, she did incredibly well. She was like, considering how poor she was like maintaining her own airway and everything, so that's all wonderful.
I think with that sort of thing, I mean, I'm not a parent, but I imagine you take your lead from the doctors. And if the doctors and nurses around you aren't expressing any great panic or fear, then you would say, well, okay, she's not.
Yeah,
this is not ideal, but it sounds like she'll be okay.
Yeah, it's kind of odd though, but I've went into it just like, I just assumed at the end of the day she'll be all right. You know, not saying there won't be any sort of issues along the way. There won't be concerns, but like, do you know what I mean? But I always knew that, like, whatever happens, she'll be all right. I think because once we got over like a certain time, you know, like sort of after like 28 weeks, the life expectancy goes like up really well. So like, after once that, I was like, right, okay, I'm not going to be that concerned now because she'll be all right, come what may. And she is. Yeah. So I don't know why. I've always just assumed it. Never any doubts, and she's not proved me wrong yet.
Great.
I'm sure she'll go from strength to strength.
Oh yes, she'll be. She'll do what she wants. She'll grow up. She'll do what she wants.
Lovely though this is. Final thoughts, Becca.
Oh no, I'm interested in hearing about.
We talk about this as long as
about Neem, to be honest.
We haven't done Becca's final thoughts yet.
I can't really add much to what's already been said. Yeah, watched this film a couple of times. Didn't really remember it well the first time around, unfortunately. I think I perhaps wasn't paying attention, and there's a lot of other things going on at the time as well.
It is a film you have to concentrate for. It's not difficult, but you can just drift past you.
It's not that it's hard or difficult to follow or anything like that.
It just can drift by you.
No, it's just there's a lot going on. If it's kind of it's not. There are other films with more complex plots that run for longer and are probably more boring and worse written.
You wouldn't want to miss the detail though, because
it's literally the devil is in the devil. You really do have to pay attention. It's one of those things, and also
I'll tell you what's good about this, and this is kind of what like picking up what Becca's saying is that the details there is there in the film. But you can just let it wash all over and just watch like the acting and the motifs, and it doesn't matter. You can still like broadly get what's going on and just enjoy it for like the all the Western cliches that it has and the way it's done.
This is kind of where they came from as well. At the same time, this is it's a lot of those kind of seeds.
And if you want to dig deeper, you can do. It's all there, you know. Sorry, Becca, I was sorry to interrupt, but yeah, that's all.
No, that's pretty much the point I was going to make, actually, to be honest. Yeah, it's one of those things, you can watch it and enjoy it for what it is, definitely, but then if you really watch it, like you've done, and pick it all apart, definitely, and you can see where these, you can watch all these really early sort of like 40s, 50s, indeed sort of where Indiana Jones came from, the kind of like boys' own adventures as well. I mean, you could argue that the seeds are kind of really sown in those, going back to those really early frontier stories, but in terms of like the sort of classic Western tropes that we know today, especially on the big screen, kind of come from here really. But yeah, it's one of those you do have to kind of really watch and pay attention to, definitely, to kind of pick up on really all the fine detail. But yeah, no, I enjoyed this on second or third time viewing. Probably until next week, it'll probably be my favourite of the series. But yeah, as I say, for a film that kind of really has 3D, and like you do a bit of reading around this film as well, like Van Cleef is more known for his westerns, especially kind of playing like villainous type characters as well. And it's really interesting to learn that perhaps he'd only kind of, up until this point, he'd only kind of done like bit parts here and there on TV. Like he'd been an artist. He travelled around quite a bit as well. He had quite an interesting life. And this film kind of really changed his career, really, which is quite interesting. But yeah, really enjoyed it, and I'm thoroughly looking forward to most iconic film next week. Oh, sorry.
Awesome. What I'm missing most is knowing anything about this film at all. I'm a bit clueless, really. I know it's got that guy from Back to the Future 3 in it, But I don't remember when they sort of got that superpowered train that went back to 1985. So I was lost. I was lost watching this, and like Sanchez made an appearance, but like there was no Timothy Dalton. So, help.
Speaking of Timothy Dalton, right? Did anyone like sort of surprised to see him in The Crown playing Stuart, like Pete Townsend?
Yeah, he's on Pete Townsend. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Timothy Dalton playing Pete Townsend.
Well, I've never seen
Pete Townsend, no.
Pete Townsend. Yeah. No, it's
that'd be amazing, wouldn't it?
I know. Particularly the scenes where he whips out his credit card and. No, I hadn't seen The Crown. I think I watched a couple of episodes once and weren't in the mood, but my wife likes it, and she said I'd happily watch it again. So I've just literally about 2 weeks ago. I'm not in any hurry with it because it's all right. It's very well made. And
I think the series now, especially because it goes into like the 90s.
I think the appeal of it is exactly that. It's less that it's anywhere that decent a drama, or even that I'm that interested in the royal family. It's more the fact that it's a romp through the last 50 years of British history more than anything else. So I'm interested in it from that perspective. But I've only just finished the first season, so they're on their original cast. The guy Timothy Dalton's playing is still played by the guy from Coupling. So
yeah, but he's fabulous though. He was really good, definitely. But yeah, Dalton's appearance, I think, took us all by surprise.
I've still got Matt Smith's Prince Philip in my version.
And I had no idea. Was it Anne he was like having a relationship with?
Who?
Like
Margaret.
Yeah, Margaret. Sorry. Yeah, I had no idea. I had no idea he was like potentially be a royal.
Yeah, he was a divorcee. Not Pete Townsend though. It's not the same.
No, it wasn't Pete. That's a different one.
No, it was Roger Daltrey. Read some history. Read some history.
Okay.
Keith Moon? No.
Tim Dalton is Roger Daltrey in Princess Margaret.
Right. With you.
That's a film we'd like to see. Maybe not.
Yeah. The gun barrel shot is something else entirely. Believe me.
It's just in that one episode.
And I don't know how they got a camera in there, if I'm honest.
Right, I would like to know how, but no, he was just in that one episode, really, wasn't he? Because like when they announced the lineup for this new series, and Timothy Dalton just in one episode. Okay.
He died before her. So
I think so. But he's really good in it actually, and he's still really charming, and it's quite interesting to look back at some of his other roles actually as well, like outside of Bond as well. Especially because a few of us JBR lot have just returned from a jaunt to Vienna, so obviously a bit of Dalton love.
Yeah. Well, I remember Roger Daltrey and McVicker, if that's helpful.
It's always the Beautician and the Beast
as well.
Beautician and the what?
Beautician and the Beast.
The Beautician and the Beast with Fran Drescher.
Yeah, with Fran Drescher from Friends.
You never
Oh my god!
It sounded terrible till you said Fran Drescher.
Timothy Dalton.
Check it out. It's really good in it.
This Russian kind of Tsar kind of thing, or king or whatever, and Fran Drescher sort of goes over to live with him for some reason. I can't exactly remember why.
Plot device, probably.
And she melts it, and they fall in love, and she melts his heart, and yeah.
Yeah.
It's exactly what it says on the tin.
Hang on a minute, I'll look this up. I don't even know if I've heard of it.
It was like 90s or mid-90s.
97.
Yeah, I thought so. It's up there with Hot Fuzz as like one of his best. I think it's cheesy in a bit now, but it's so much fun.
The thing is, though, you still look at him and think like, yeah, he could still play Bond.
No, this is it. Well, this is a debate we're having on first JBR thread. Like, if he came back now, like maybe him and Brosnan, if they sort of came back, if they said, "Oh yeah, no, we're gonna follow in the footsteps of Logan and do like old Bond," they probably could invite Brosnan and they could invite Dalton back for sure. So. Yeah.
Brosnan has had 20 years to learn a third expression.
Come up with another pain face.
President of the Eastern European country, Slovakia.
All right. Fake Eastern European country.
Largely negative reviews. The show sounds promising.
Was it a Disney film?
I don't think so. No.
No, I wonder if it would be on Disney Plus or somewhere, but it's probably on like Amazon.
No, it's Paramount.
Paramount. Oh, there we go. It'll be on Paramount Plus then, probably.
Came out February 1997. Oh. And off a budget of 16 million, it did 11.5. So yeah, it didn't do great.
It's a fun film.
Ian McNeice is in it, the guy from Doc Martin and Rome.
Yep.
Patrick Malahide. Patrick Malahide.
Oh wow!
Becca, he's the banker at the start of The World Is Not Enough. He's best known as Chisholm in Minder.
The numbers are not on your side.
Yeah. That's actually not a bad cast for us.
Any other Bond connections? Let's see who else is in this film.
Yeah, it's got Vincent Schiavelli.
Oh yeah, Dr. Kaufman as well. Oh,
Yeah.
I see all the Bond connections lit.
Dr.
I
Kaufman.
can't see his name there, actually. I believe he's in it because you've seen it, but I can't see his name.
Oh, on Wiki.
Oh yes, I can see it. I
Yeah.
can see it. As jailer.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. No, I can't see anyone else who's been in a Bond film, or who's been in Princess Margaret, for that matter.
Let's see who else. Ian McNeice. Who else we got?
Ian McNeice obviously sticks out.
Yeah, I don't recognise anybody else.
Michael Lerner, I know.
Yeah.
He looks familiar. I don't know what I've seen him in though.
Well, he's been in loads and loads of things, but just to pick out things you'd have thought of, he was in Days of Future Past.
And Godzilla.
And Godzilla.
The terrible Godzilla.
Oh really?
Yeah, he's like the mayor.
By terrible, I'm assuming we meet the fucking asshole from Independence Day. What's he called?
Yeah.
Michael Lerner. Yeah. All right. Okay. So
Yeah, I don't recognise anybody else. Unfortunately, I do apologise.
So in summary, we like for a few dollars more.
The similar show that we talked about, Timothy Dalton song.
Flash forward as
I
well.
know that name. No. All right. Okay. Don't know. All right. So I'm still clueless, Becca. Minutes on from admitting that fact.
Okay, yeah, we'll do some fun facts. Yeah, don't worry, Dave. I didn't step on any of your fun facts, so it was all right.
Well, I only had one or two. I just needed to mention the lawsuit and the town being a new one. That was all.
No, that's okay. No, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, the town's amazing.
The town is amazing because, like, what we don't know now is inflation. Well, we know in that we can type it into an inflation calculator and get a figure for today, but you don't know what things relatively cost. I mean, to give a silly example, my granddad years ago asked me what the cinema cost, and I told him, and he went, like huge shock. And he said it used to cost this, and I said, well, what did you earn at the time? And he told me, and I went, so what you're saying is cinema was 40 times more expensive. So in your day,
if you're earning more, that's it.
It's only 600,000. Bond's films at this point were costing multi-millions. It doesn't feel a high budget film, but it feels so far on from the last film.
Yeah.
And like you kind of like cinema going habits have changed as well. I mean, obviously you still buy like concessions and stuff like that, but then like probably maybe it's like maybe not our parents, maybe like our grandparents or their parents' like generation. It was still probably maybe of the era of this is where we came in, and you might get cartoons and a newsreel and sort of 40s, 50s, and that sort in the 60s as well. You probably get more for your money than
I've just looked up just very quickly. I looked up the director of this film. The one we've just been talking about.
You don't get much value from any
Ken Kwapper. He's best known for Sesame Street Presents Follow That Bird, Sisterhood of the Travelling Pants, and he's just not that into you.
It was written by one of the guys from The Abyss, one of the actors.
Yeah.
The one with the rat.
Maybe we should do that next year as well. Pick a random film from an esteemed actor and be like, right, let's do it.
So, sorry, fact us.
And then some of us had a group watch of The Rocketeer as well, and Dalton is legendary, but his accent in that film wanders here, there, and everywhere. I struggle to place it sometimes.
My favourite when he goes proper Gestapo, when he goes like brains all over the cabin. that's my favourite. that's my favourite part.
I have to watch that film again. It's so much fun. But yeah, he does it because he's playing sort of like an actor sort of in the film. But yeah, his accent goes here, there, and everywhere. It travels a lot. Fun facts about this film. Fun fact number one: the British cinema release version was originally cut by the BBFC to shorten the beating scene, and removing the flashback scene where Mortimer's sister shoots herself. Apparently, these missing scenes were restored for feature home releases, but around 20 seconds were missing from a 2005 special edition DVD.
Did you say they cut where the woman shot herself?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, basically where she gets shot.
That would make that film incomprehensible.
Yeah.
Just very confusing. But anyway, that particular scene where she is shot was originally chopped out by the BBFC.
Is it just like a close up of the wound?
Could be. You could have.
I think so. Yeah, maybe just like gory detail.
Yeah. Maybe.
rather than the actual like her being shot. It's probably just more like actually just detail of the wound, which is a bit gross. But obviously this footage was restored for later versions. And there are quite a few. I won't go into it because it's quite a long fun fact, which you can read on IMDb.com yourself. But the German theatrical version was actually cut by 10 minutes and was redubbed when it was re-released again in 1995. But 10 minutes, that's quite a lot to be chopped out of it.
I think so.
Fun fact number 2, Sergio Leone, whose name I still can't pronounce, wanted initially Henry Fonda for the role of Mortimer, but he declined. Then next in line was Charles Bronson, who also declined. And then next was Lee Marvin, who he couldn't take up the role because he was signed up to make Cat Ballou. And then next in line, only then was Lee Van Cleef offered the role, who actually hadn't acted very much. And last kind of appearance in a Western was How the West Was Won in 1962. Turned out to be a bit of a career boost for him, having only played smaller roles in like film, TV until maybe like the mid-60s. He'd kind of fallen on hard times, drank a lot, etc., etc. Leone actually made Van Cleef the co-star of this film, which was quite a surprise to Van Cleef, and it proved to be like obviously one of his major big screen roles. Obviously now he's iconic and known for his kind of various villainous roles in sort of westerns and the like in the 60s and 70s. Fun fact number 3, same as last time, same as the last film, all this film's footage was shot silently, without recording sound or sound effects, dialogue, things like that. And then after they finished shooting, Eastwood and Van Cleef returned to Italy to record their dialogue and to add sound effects, etc. Fun fact number 4, there are a few crew member cameos in this film. The whistling at the start before the main titles, I think, is the director. And then the film's set designer, Carlo Simi, plays the El Paso bank manager, who's dubbed with a very English accent and sounds a bit strange. And fun fact number 5, location shots took place largely in Spain, I think Madrid doubling for White Rock, and in and around Andalusia, Grenada, places like that, doubling for the Texas-Mexico border.
Right.
And other locations as well. But yeah, that's just my interesting fun facts that I thought were quite interesting. And I generally keep number 5 because it's quite short. So rather than going on and on and on. So I figure stop at 5, that's a nice number. Why not?
Cool.
Even though it's an odd number. Apologies.
Good. I can't wait to see what we get next week as well, because like I say, that film's got so much sort of legend around it, particularly different cuts of it. Once Upon a Time in the West has got the same, different cuts of it, and you're not sure when redubbings were done and who did what and when, and that could be, let's say, quite interesting.
Yeah, so somewhere there is probably there exists spread across the galaxy like lots of different alternate cuts. I wonder if there's like a definitive edition. I suppose it's like The Godfather, when those sort of films that have got so many different versions, edits, cuts. What's another one that's like that? Blade Runner, that's got 3 or 4 different versions floating around.
Yeah, I mean, at least with Blade Runner, I don't particularly like the theatrical version. Some people do. Some people really do. Some people, it's their favourite. I just find... I'm amazed. It honestly sounds like Harrison Ford is falling asleep during it. It just sounds
he's
so
sleepwalking
bored.
through it, isn't he? Sometimes
It's almost passive aggressive. It's almost like he's been asked to do the voiceover, doesn't want to, and he's keen that we know he didn't want to.
That's pretty much what happened.
That's really how it plays. It's almost unprofessional, even though he's quite laconic anyway.
I actually don't mind it too much. I'm one of the few.
It does give it that gumshoe feel.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I will say that
it's claustrophobic.
Yeah,
and which works in a way, but a lot of the film is claustrophobic. But when you take it away, the film can breathe so much more.
Oh, I completely agree. I watched them back to back one night because I used to have the final cut, but I imported it with the 5 versions of the film.
Yeah.
So I watched the final. I can't remember which way around I watched it. I have a feeling I watched the theatrical first. I'd already seen the final cut, or I'd already seen the director's cut probably. But I watched it and then watched it again, and I thought, well, that will prove if I prefer the final cut when it's a slowish film, and I've already seen it tonight. If I find the final cut enjoyable, then that will tell me that it's vastly superior, and it was.
Yeah.
But at least with that film, it's not necessarily a defense, because you still get into the age-old argument of final cut and director's vision and writer's vision and studio meddling. There's endless debate to be had about that. But at least it was the first version out there. Do you know what I mean? At least when that version was released, it was the only version of Blade Runner out there. Whereas what you've had with a lot of these, Weinstein was famous for this. He'd buy some foreign film, and then re-edit it so it made no fucking sense at all. Occasionally put some. He did it with things like Shaolin Soccer, which is like a comedy, but the original version of the film was completely different. And there's something very disrespectful of going. It's almost, and I'm over-egging it to say this, but there's almost something a bit xenophobic about it. There's almost an element of, it don't matter, it's just a foreign film.
Yeah, because a lot of time changed the music and when we cut, because he did it to a lot of Jet Li films and stuff, and it kind of affected them, the original versions being available, like Hero. The Zhang Yimou film.
Yes, that was a very notable example, actually.
That's true.
And there's a Hero was famous because it was of such a notable example, and it was a prestige picture in its own country.
Yeah.
But there's so many examples of smaller purchases where, he'd pick up a film that may be showing at Toronto or Sundance or something like that, and just butcher the fucking thing. And you just think, don't buy it then.
Yeah.
What's the point if you're gonna? Sorry. What's the point if you're gonna treat it like that?
Yeah, and it's.
Sorry.
Was it like in this way, like, I can make money from this if I make it in what would be more like sellable to market?
A lot of the time he was shorting.
I did that with quotation mark kind of thing, like just
and dubbing them as well.
Yeah. And you think, well, there's a fine line. I mean, I don't know if they were knowing what we know of his personality. Almost certainly not, because he was a famous bully apart from everything else. But there'd almost be some cover in defense for it if there was any sort of sense of agreement of, we'll buy your picture, but this is not quite right for an American audience, for example. But none of that. He'd just take it, lock him out, and butcher it. So, yeah. That was it. So it is a shame, but at least we've got the full version of all these things now. At least. So it'll be the same with the other two Leone films we're going to, or the other two, the next two of Leone we're going to cover. Certainly with both of those, I know that they were released far shorter in the United States. It happened with Leone generally. It happened with Once Upon a Time in America, because Once Upon a Time in America is such a long film. But then it becomes a bit more of a grey area, because you go, well, yeah, I can understand you maybe don't want to put a 4-hour film in cinemas, but at the same time, why are you buying it? Why are you green lighting it? Why are you agreeing that final cut and then changing it? Anyway, as for social media, you can find me at thepastykid1976 on Twitter.
And you can find me on you can find all the old episodes on Podbean. If you look for Do You Expect Us to Talk, it should be on there. But you can find out more on cinecharts.co.uk.
Find me at Films on Wax on Twitter.
And you can find us on Twitter at Expect Us to Talk. Don't forget to rate us, review us, to like us and share us on your podcatcher of choice. Whichever platform you're on, please give us a glowing 5-star review. It helps us to attract more listeners. It sort of tickles the algorithms a little bit. Helps us to rise up in the rankings, basically. You can find us on Facebook at Do You Expect Us to Talk, on Twitter at Expect Us to Talk, YouTube, Do You Expect Us to Talk. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, Podbay, whichever platform you happen to find us on. If you want to email us, expectustotalk@gmail.com.
Okay,
I probably need to update all of that, really, to be honest.
I don't know. It's kind of autopilot. I always listen to what you say, Becca, but that little bit at the end just like drifts over me because it's the same stuff every time. We're just telling people.
Yeah, I just trying to think of where
I don't even know what you said, really.
There's a lot going on Twitter at the moment. A lot of people seem to be escaping for the time being. We're going to stay there. we're not yet on Mastodon. We're not yet on Hive. We're not on other ones.
I'm
that
not
have
sure.
opened
I
up
mean,
just yet.
I know Charlie is on Mastodon, for example, because we follow each other on there. And I know he's used it because I've seen posts on there and articles he's shared and stuff. But at the same time, I think the majority of us, and I can't speak for anybody, we've got a Mastodon account just in case. I'm not intending to leave Twitter, but I do have a Mastodon account. But it's only that, like, if I don't actually think he's going to screw it up that badly. I think
Just to see what happens. Just so we've got a backup just in case.
Well, there is obviously the nuclear option that it does become far more toxic. But the only worry I've got with him at the moment is that if he's made that many people redundant, is the site, is it running on fumes until it hits a problem? Do you know what I mean?
I wonder.
You think at the moment I've heard people say things like, "God, it's running fine," and he's cut most of the staff. What were they doing all day? And you think, well, you don't know till you get an outage, do you?
Well, yeah,
No, that's it. Yeah, until you kind of lose those key people. You
So
think, oh god.
I've got Mastodon for the day I go into Twitter, and it's like this might not be back up for a week or two. But at the moment, no, I'm still living on Twitter, although I have a Mastodon account. Anyway.
Personally, I haven't opened up one yet, and I'm still kind of. I mean, I do keep threatening to close Twitter down, not in its entirety, just my little account, just my little corner. But I rarely use it like I used to these days. I'm just kind of weaning off it really and kind of winding it down, perhaps. So.
A lot of what Twitter becomes tonally will depend on the algorithm. Because as much as I have opinions, I don't need to bother voicing here about reactivating certain accounts. Whatever I think of that, how much it ends up actually bothering me is how the algorithm works. If they decide they're going to have offensive content, but effectively it's not going to appear in your feed unless you go searching it out, then fine. Let there be this poisonous corner of the site. But we'll keep a watching brief on that. Anyway, we are racing to the end of the Dollars trilogy, which means, Becca.
Yes, do you expect